I want to thank everybody for joining us tonight for part two of Joe's presentation called The State of Earth's Environment. And I'm Marian Cedio, and I serve on the NCCCA board as the secretary. And before we get started, I want to encourage you all or invite you to introduce yourselves in the chat. And also, if you want to put down any other pertinent information, like what groups you belong to, any other upcoming events that we might want to know about, anything like that, please feel free to do so. And also use the chat to write down any questions that you think of during the talk. And then what we'll do is after Joe is done talking, we will, Carter and I will take turns. We'll read the questions to Joe and he'll try to answer them for you. And let's see what else. Oh, during the talk, please be on mute so that we don't have any interruptions. And so I hope I've covered all the bases here. We look forward to having Meryl back joining us really soon, but certainly greatly appreciate Carter stepping in. And that's what I really love about the climate environmental community, especially here in San Diego, is how cooperative and interactive we all are. And it's going to really take a whole village, to use an old phrase, but one that's really very pertinent to today. So anyway, it is my pleasure to introduce tonight's speaker, my friend and NCCA President Joe Houde. And I'd like to let you know just a little bit about Joe. Joe has worked in over 50 countries teaching seminars and consulting with businesses and government leaders. He has led workshops at over a dozen universities in the US, UK, Australia, South Africa, and the Middle East. He has decades of managerial business experience and has worked as a counselor for people with disabilities, as well as women and men affected by domestic violence. His educational background includes a Master's of Science, Electronics Commerce, Bachelor's in Business Administration from National University, and a Master of Arts, Counseling Psychology from Pacifica Graduate Institute, Santa Barbara. Joe has a long-standing interest in the environment, and in 2018, he completed the climate reality training held up in Los Angeles, California. So without any further ado, Joe.
Thank you, Marian. You know, it's kind of cool. Meryl and Carter and you were all at that same 2018 session.
That's
So
right. I think a lot of us met up at that group up there.
That's right. So
yeah.
Kudos to Al Gore and for all the wonderful, wonderful things he's doing for our climate. And
yes,
I was there too.
Oh, is that right?
Yeah.
Fantastic. Well, more kudos. I think that sparked a lot of us to be involved, to get involved more, and to be persistently involved since then. So I think that's fabulous. Thank you for coming to part two. If you recall, in part one, we overviewed the planetary boundaries and took a look in some depth at climate, ocean, and ozone systems on the planet. This evening, I'd like to cover the remaining 6 planetary boundaries, and then we will look at how the planetary boundary framework is being used by economists and by the actuaries in the insurance industry and the health industry and others to frame their thinking about, how to best act in the community and the like. So, I think that's fantastic that we'll do that. And then the third part next month, and the second Thursday, we will complete the 3-part presentation, and we will. What I propose to do then is tie all of the boundaries to local climate action, and we'll look at in the context of the planetary boundaries, what's working in climate action plans and where there are holes and better things or more important things to do that aren't being done. And we'll use the boundaries to guide our discussion of local action. So tonight, the first of the boundaries that I'd like to discuss is biodiversity. I think we all know if we lose a lot of biodiversity, the whole planet and certainly humans will be at a major disadvantage. If you recall, when we talked about the boundaries, the scientists who developed this framework set control variables, trying to specify, say, when we have passed this condition or this variable, we have challenges that we need to recover from. And in the biodiversity space, there are two control variables. They have both been exceeded. One is genetic diversity. We're losing diversity. And the second is the functional integrity of the biosphere, and it's described as human appropriation of net primary production. Basically, as nature and the planet grows plants and animals and so forth that we can eat, the question becomes, how much of the planet's production do humans take? And the general guideline is we should not take more than 30% for human use, and we're actually taking more than 10%, sorry, we're actually taking 30%. So we've got a real serious problem in both the diversity and in how much we are consuming of what the planet produces. Ocean diversity, biodiversity is not currently addressed in the science. We all know species are going more extinct. All vertebrates, if you see the graph clearly, there's more and more extinction. If you read the book, The Sixth Extinction, which won a Pulitzer Prize, I believe, is very clear discussion of what's happening today. The Earth had 5 prior extinctions, and we're now in the 6th. And just to highlight a couple of examples of what's happening, there are 7 pockets of grizzly bears in the northwest US and the southwest Canada. And sadly, these pockets of bears are separated by human activity, and they can't get from one pocket to the other. And so the mating has to happen within each separate pocket. And as a result, grizzly bears and other species are losing genetic diversity. This is why California has, and the US has set a goal to reserve 30% of the land and our coasts by 2030 for non-human use, if you will. And why Ed Wilson, who is now passed away, but was at Harvard, wrote a book called, no, I forgot the title just now, but basically he argues for Half Earth is the book. He argues that we should reserve 50% of the planet for non-human life by 2050. Clearly allowing various species like these bears to interact is crucial. There's another style of loss that's happening. This book by Adam Wells, if you're interested in this topic, I highly recommend. It's filled with stories like the one that I'm highlighting here, from the book. And Adam talks about how the red knots on the west coast of Africa, the east coast of Africa, are dying because of the Arctic. It's kind of stunning. In summer, the red knots breed. They arrive as the snow melts in Siberia. It takes 3 weeks to hatch and 3 weeks to be able to fly. In the 1980s, the snow melt, since the 1980s, the snow melt has been arriving a half day earlier each period of time. Insects emerge, breed, and die before the red knots are hatched. And so we end up with many malnourished birds that die before they can fly back to Africa. Those that do fly back tend to be smaller, and sadly, their beaks are shorter because of their smaller size. And they use their beaks to find clams in the mud and the coast in Africa for food, but many of their beaks are too short. And by 1980, we had 500,000 red knots that were counted in Africa. Now we have about 100,000. Um, just the warm spring Arctic air is killing these birds. And this is the kind of biodiversity loss that I think we just, unless you really focused on this topic, in the richness of life, we tend to miss these kinds of things. Who would have guessed that red knots in Africa are dying because of warmth in the Arctic? And there are numerous similar stories. This is Murray's in Alaska. There was a huge heat wave in the Pacific Northwest. We had 500,000 of these birds, and about 80% of them died in the heat wave. And you can see a decade later, we still have little recovery. This kind of thing is happening to, again, many species. The loss of genetic diversity, obviously, if a species goes extinct, is a problem, or if the numbers decline dramatically, is a further problem. This is a huge direct threat to our food security and to our human survival. Agriculture accounts for 90% of the forest loss. We talked a little bit about that in the last session, if you were here. This is a key issue. Over the past century, 75% of plant genetic diversity has been lost. Are you aware that 9 plant species account for 2/3 of global human crop production, and less than 200 plant species contribute to our food supply? I'm sure we're all aware that, we had the potato famine in Ireland in 1848 and so forth. If we have famines or challenges, to the 9 key plant species that feed us, we're in big trouble. So maintaining genetic diversity is really, really important. Soil degradation is also hurting our ability to grow food. Fertilizers are a problem, and our low dietary diversity is leading to 11 million right now estimated premature deaths per year. So enriching our food diversity is really valuable, would be really important to do. What's also happening is wildlife, of course, is collapsing because we are consuming so much space on the planet and killing them and hunting them and whatever. We have in some species 95% loss. We're dangerously close to tipping points, and we're going to finish later in the discussion. We'll talk about some tipping points. The nature is unraveling. We have to not pass any of the tipping points that we're at risk of. The average loss over the last 50 years is 73%. We have a picture of Borneo's palm oil plantations coming up in a few slides. And, they're killing thousands of orangutans a year. And it's just another example. A wonderful recent book on this topic is Before They Vanish by Paul Ehrlich, who's on the faculty at Stanford, and a couple of his colleagues, one from Mexico and one from Australia. And effectively, the book argues that another aspect of biodiversity loss is, like in the red knots, huge population loss. And while the species isn't extinct yet, it is headed that way, and many species are in this category. This statistic was from the book. I just blew me away. In the 1800s, there were nearly 5,000 pounds of wild animal biomass for every human. Today, there's 4.5 pounds. It's like, wow, what are we doing? This can be thought of as like the Chicxulub meteorite that wiped out the dinosaurs, and that's the path that we're on. And governments have never met a single biodiversity target in the history of the UN. This is from the Natural History Museum in the UK, and they are addressing they have an index they call the Biodiversity Intactness Index, and you can see in all of the non-dark colors, most of the US, a fair amount of South America, below the Amazon, all of Europe and Asia, India, Africa, much of Australia, China, and so forth. Our biodiversity is diminishing dramatically, fundamentally where people live. We need conservation of genetic diversity. We have several seed banks scattered around the world. Mostly, there's one in, I think, Finland, trying to preserve plant species. We need to bring biodiversity back into our farms. This monoculture farming is diabolically bad for biodiversity. We need to understand the natural cycles of soil, carbon, and water, and plant and grow congruent with them in a compatible way. And this is a key strategy for food planning, food security planning going forward. We have to avoid and reduce the monocultures that we currently have. There is a treaty proposed, the International Treaty on Plant Genetic Resources, and related to it, what's called the Nagoya Protocol for Biodiversity Sharing. So this whole movement toward preserving genetic diversity is incredibly valuable. This is a map of now all the dark colors of where we are consuming too much of the plant matter that the plant produces. And again, every place people live, the same we saw in the preceding chart, more or less. We're just consuming the calories that are produced at excessive rates, not leaving enough for other species. Mm. What do? We have to stop burning stuff. We have to implement the 30 by 30 goal. California right now, in targeting 30 by 30, is around in the land, is currently around 26% is conserved and locked in, and about 17%, I think, of the ocean front. So the Sierra Club and many other groups are working diligently to get us to 30 by 30. What we probably really need is 50 by 50. And this link, if you get the slides and look it up, the class of 1973 at Harvard were all students of E.O. Wilson, and in 2023, they did a presentation on what they, after 50 years of career, are doing to try to make 50 by 50 manifest. It's a wonderful multi-hour discussion. One of the faculty members now with Wilson students from 73, for example, has spent his career looking at in studying the quantity of life and types of species in the oceans. Really cool stuff. And very interestingly, there was a report published a few months ago, mid 24, that I just really appreciated. Uh, this work by Dr. Dinerstein says that if we preserve the right 1.2% of land, we can save most of the threatened species on the planets. And he mapped these pieces of land. There are 16,000 sites, actually, almost 17,000 sites of pieces of land that if we could preserve those and help the people who are living on them move to other places and so forth, we can preserve the majority of species on the planet. It's a fabulous piece of research. I don't know if there's any real chance that we will do this. I hope we will, but it's a really cool thing to have researched. Next boundary, freshwater. There are two flavors of fresh water, so-called blue water, which is in lakes and rivers and so forth, and green water, which is water in soil moisture. The boundary has been set at 11% of ice-free land experiencing strong deviations in soil moisture, for example, with respect to green water. We will see that we have exceeded the boundaries, defined boundaries for both blue and green water. 3% of the water on the earth is fresh, and 0.1% is available for us. We have this enormous history of trying to control water on the planet. This particular boundary, the water issue, to me is probably the most fundamental of all of them of all the boundary conditions on the planet. When it comes to controlling water, I don't know whether you're aware, but we have more than 36,000 dams on the planet. It's just astonishing what we have done to try to control water. There are 14 in San Diego County, and the deferred maintenance, the entropic debt of those is north of $1 billion. We are not funding. You remember a couple of years ago, we had these amazing atmospheric river storms that put water into all of the reservoirs, in particular to Lake Hodges. The dam at Lake Hodges was built with a 100-year maximum life in mind. It's about 107 or 8 years old now and urgently needs to be repaired. So we had all the water from the atmospheric rivers flowing into Lake Hodges. And what we had to do was open the gates and let the water run off into the ocean for fear that the long overdue for replacement dam would break and cause massive catastrophe from a flooding the fronting lake. What a tragedy. It's billions of dollars. I mean, billions of gallons of water were flushed. Above Lake Hodges is the Olivenhain Reservoir. I've actually been inside the reservoir. It's an amazing feat of engineering and hanging out. If we had full Lake Hodges and at peak energy times and solar, midday solar arrays, we could pump water up into the reservoir and then let it flow down when we needed peak energy. And the Olivenhain Reservoir could produce enough energy for something like 26 or 27,000 homes. But we can't do any of that now because the dam is too old, and it looks like a half a decade to a decade before we'll replace the dam. We're just not paying attention enough to this aspect of our water system. Water stress, going to shock everybody, is where people live again. Look at the water stress issues here in the US and across Europe and India and China and so forth. Many places on the world, we have extremely high or high water stress. One of the things that doesn't get enough attention, I think, is an understanding of our groundwater. Uh, right now, California has a law to limit the use of the groundwater for agriculture. You can see here in our Central Valley a lot of water stress. We have hundreds of thousands of acres right now that are not being planted because there's no water for them. So we are losing, diminishing our water. Tremendous problem in the Aglala Aquifer here in the center of the country, around the Great Plains. And you can see here in Texas and Oklahoma and Kansas and so forth, a huge loss of our groundwater from overuse during growing. We'll say more about that as we go further into this section. When we run AI, we use billions of cubic meters by 2027 for just for running AI. That's half the water in the UK. Each computer chip that we make uses 8 gallons of water, and we make trillions of gallons each year. GPT consumes a 500 milliliter bottle of water every 10 to 20 operations or responses. And there are 10 million acres of lawn in the US that require 270 billions of gallons of water every 7 days. Now, I don't understand why in San Diego, when we have a desert that we live in, we don't remove all of the lawn and put in desert plants. Some of those are just absolutely beautiful. We're just wasting water, and there's no doubt at all that things will get drier here over time, over the next decades, because of the heating from our climate and GHG emissions. We use enough water to water the plant, to water our lawns, that could provide every human a shower every few days. You know, it's just gargantuan amounts of water, mostly, in my view, wasted. Certainly from a functional point of view. I guess grass is pretty, but wow. Parts of Texas right now are literally out of water, and much of Texas is drying out. We are closing right now in Texas one farm a week from lack of water. Farmers can't grow. Tomato production is just about gone. There used to be huge tomato production along the Rio Grande River. It's down by at least 85% from where it was. You can't get cantaloupes anymore. Texas passed a $1 billion water fund for the state, which is sufficient to head off immediate shortages, but it's estimated to cost $80 billion by mid-century. So, you know, it's just tip of the iceberg. The true shortfall was 10 to 12 million acres feet per year. So said the senator. He asked that the gas industry stop using potable water for fracking. Well, you know, we have some folks in Washington who are talking about drill, baby, drill, and drilling consumes water, and that's water that is not going to be available for farms and for food. We probably have to embrace reuse measures, and we're doing a not good enough job of that in San Diego County, and I think, and we need more desalination, clearly. Going back to our biodiversity, all the red here is where birds are dying because we have filled in our wetlands. And, the vast bulk, 90% or some number like that, of our wetlands have been filled in for commercial or residential use and so forth. Health impacts, when we had the Supreme Court, I think about 2 years ago, rule that a family that owned a home with wetlands attached to it in Idaho could fill in the wetlands. We have this amazing concept that somehow individual ownership is more important than protecting the planet in our wetlands. When we reduce the flows in our rivers and so forth, we have pollutants and that increase. Our drought can limit our ability to grow food. It's quite amazing. You watch this, we know the terrible events in LA recently, but were you aware that in 2024 there were 1,600 wildfires in New Jersey? I mean, it tends to get 40 inches of rain a year, and half of those 800 were in October and November. Just amazing what's happening to our land as in fires in this case because of the lack of water. We have issues, of course, of sanitation, hygiene, recreation. You can't do any. Loss of habitat and healthy water for animals, all these impacts. This chart talks about soil moisture, and we'll say more about this too, but notice all the brown here is major or minor dry. And you can see much of the US, the Amazon, much of Africa, the Middle East, China, major dry conditions. Soil is drying out. Excuse me. We talked about the California and Texas a little bit. Let's say more. There are 4 million square miles or square kilometers, sorry, of previously humid landscapes that have become dry in a 30-year period from the UN, looking like this. And please imagine how will we grow food without water and on this dry, cracked earth? I heard once in school somewhere that the Amazon was the biggest river on the planet and had the biggest flow of all rivers on the planet. And what you're looking at is a picture of the Amazon in 2024. It's absolutely shocking. The people who live there, typically use boats to get to shops where they get food or medicines and the like, and they obviously are not able to do that when there's no water. The crop areas with high risk of water variability, again, much of the Oglala Aquifer are California Central Valley, Southern Europe, India, China, south of the Amazon, or south of the Amazon forest and South America and so forth. The freshwater over the past short time, we're right now, as you know, experiencing the fringes of an atmospheric river. The fresh water on the planet has dropped 220 cubic miles. I'd like to say more about that. Let's put it like this. A 1 degree centigrade increase in temperature, going back to our planet heating and climate, GHGs and all, 1% increase increases the water vapor in the atmosphere by 7%. That amount of atmosphere, it's easy to say, but what does it really mean? More than half of the volume of all the water in all the rivers on the planet flowed up into the atmosphere. By mid-century, the volume of water in the atmosphere will exceed the water on all rivers on the planet. So what happens? The atmosphere is holding all this water, and when it's ready to dump, it dumps the atmospheric rivers, and we get floods in South San Diego with thousands of people displaced. And we have this huge excess of growth of greenery. And then things dry out, and that greenery becomes dry and brittle and kindling for fire almost. And, there you go. We have LA. This is all, underpinning the fires in LA. Floods in 35 countries. You remember back, this is the slide that we used at the beginning of, near the beginning of the first part of this presentation. There are 35 countries that had floods, between 10/1 and 10/21, 3 weeks in last October. A lot of these floods tend to come in the autumn, and this is a clear example. Expect 70% of the global land surface will have more aridification this century. So where are our plans to deal with drought and flood conditions and the consequential damage from the water, as well as, of course, the fires as just happened here in LA. Another phenomenon related to fresh water. We have 200,000 glaciers on the planet, and they are melting. And this is an example of the melt that's happening in this one lake glacier. I just use this as a picture to make the example. But there are many Andean glaciers that are melting or have melted. And the good news is, for a short period of time, the villages below them have lots of water for agriculture. But then once they have melted, the bad news is there's no water for agriculture, and people have a huge problem with food. The same thing is happening with the Andes. It's happening in the Andes, it's happening in the Himalayas, and in the mountain ranges, Karakoram and so forth in Pakistan and Afghanistan and the like. So we could easily lose half of the glaciers on the planet within a few decades, a major source of fresh water. I don't know whether you've been tracking this or not, but there's a lot of literature that talks about the Thwaites Glacier in Antarctica. And the Thwaites Glacier is actually over the ocean and attached to the rock and down hundreds of meters in Antarctica. And I took this picture, January 22nd. This is a picture from NASA's Worldview. And you can see here in the center of the screen, the Thwaites Glacier is breaking up and it's slipping into the ocean. It actually, back then, that particular week, I went there several days in a row, and each day you could see more of the glacier breaking up from the satellite views that NASA provided. If this breaks up, let me back up a sentence or two. If the Greenland ice melts, we will probably have something like 24 feet of sea level rise. If Antarctic ice melts, we'll have 10 times that. And we can expect massive sea level rise. There was a report last week that demonstrated or showed that in 1 century, there were several meters of sea level rise. This is several, tens of thousands of years ago. But it's possible that if we keep doing what we're doing, that we're going to end up with multiple meters of sea level rise. And, 25% of us live on the ocean front, more or less, on the whole of humans on the planet. And the consequences of the sea level rise will be diabolical. This is another picture from January in Antarctica, and you can see all these meltwater ponds on the ice shelf. So Antarctica is melting and in very serious ways. Um, we have another phenomenon in water that's important to point to, and that is California has a law that says water is a human right. And then we allow Nestle to take 1 million gallons a day and put it in bottles and charge us exorbitant prices with plastic that pollutes for who knows how long. You know, Nestle had billions of dollars in sale taking water from, this is Strawberry Creek in the San Bernardino Mountains, not just north of here. Nestle sold this business to Arrowhead, and then the state has passed a law shutting this down. I don't know if it's fully shut down yet or not, but it's in process. Water is a human right, but we charge for it in too many cases, and it becomes a real challenge for especially uh, uh, less wealthy people. There's another concept in water that I think is important to understand and isn't talked about too much, and that's the notion of virtual water. When we produce a bag of potato chips, we use 48 grams of water. A cup of coffee, 35. To grow a pound of butter, 3,400 grams of water. It's just astonishing numbers. 1,300 tons of water to grow a ton of wheat, 16,000 tons of water per ton of beef. So think about this. The notion of virtual water, we go to Kansas, we grow wheat, we sell the wheat in the world market for nominal, market prices, whatever, that does not cover the cost of the water that we used out of the Oglala aquifer to produce that wheat. And so the wheat itself contains, in this sense, virtual water, the water that was needed to grow it. And then we sell it and we don't recover the full cost. And that the world market is basically sucking up our water in the things that we sell but don't charge for. Global virtual freshwater use, 92% goes to agriculture, some to industry and households. There are a few exporting countries, the US, India, China, and so forth, and 150 importers. There's a community in Arizona that was taken over in some sense by the Saudis to economically to grow alfalfa for the cattle in Saudi Arabia, taking the water away, virtual water, out of Arizona in this case, and the entire community in Arizona had to shut down. There was no more water. We consumed it all, and we allow this stuff to go on. You know, if we didn't have, what I say, if we didn't have the cattle that we were growing, we wouldn't have so much of this problem. In 2020, the U.S. government aid to farms was 39% of their total income, $46 billion. The food exporters, as I said, don't charge for the water used to produce the food. Importers, in effect, are subsidized by the exporting nations, and 90% of the nation's aquifers are severely depleted. This is a huge handout to U.S. agribusiness and to the people who buy those products around the world, and it depletes our otherwise useful water. It's happening all over. This is just another slide that basically says the same thing. This is the Great Salt Lake. This brown here was the original size of the Salt Lake. This is where the Salt Lake is now. Much of the water has been depleted, part of it to evaporation, much of it to agriculture and industry and the like. And now the sand that was at the bottom of the Salt Lake is blowing away as dust with a lot of pollutants, creating more problems. So to summarize the water discussion, the Global Commission on the Economics of Water says that uh, we have more than 1,000 children dying every day from illnesses due to not having safe drinking water. Is that acceptable to us? Should it be? More than half of the world's food production takes place where water supplies are expected to decrease, and we can expect the global GDP to decrease by 8 to 16% by 2050. Think here, 15% is probably somewhere around $35 trillion. I mean, that's the scale of loss that we're headed for by the way we're treating water. It is absolutely time for us and the planet to go into emergency mode on our water and to address questions of how will we deal with equity uh, with respect to water. Now, when I look at this, it's clearly impacted heavily by climate, and but yet water also is just so fundamental. We definitely need to think deep and hard and make serious changes around our water uses. We need we need a revolution in food. We need to get away from cattle and, and have more plant-based diets. We need to conserve and restore our natural habitats, uh, 50 by 50 ideally. We need to build a circular water economy. Let me give you one glimpse of what I'm going to talk about when we come to local action next time. Um, in Australia, 30% of the homes now are built or have been retrofitted with dual plumbing systems. And one plumbing system takes water used for washing showers, washing dishes, and so forth, so-called gray water, and reuses it for watering plants or flushing toilets and the like. And we get an extra whole level of use or reuse of water. Now, we have some reuse in San Diego coming with the Point Loma water recycling plant, and one in Oceanside, I think, and one in East County. But how many homes are you aware of in San Diego County have a dual plumbing system? Uh, I think from what I know, we could count them on one hand and have a few fingers left over. So it's just a small example of the kind of thing we really need to be thinking about and the policies we need to change. We need to enable clean energy and figure out how to not use so much water for AI. And we should ensure that no child dies from unsafe water. 1,000 a day is just insane. Next boundary, land system change. Well, the question here in the Amazon, do we eat steak or do we encourage and support biodiversity? This is a picture of the palm plantation in Borneo. What used to be beautiful forest, like over here, the top part of the picture, is now naked, and the orangutans and other beings that lived there in the forest, obviously not living there now. We are cutting down major fractions and burning down major fractions of the Amazon to grow soybeans and to feed cattle. And the government in Brazil said, let's stop the burning. And it's easy to see smoke in the atmosphere and to go chase the people who are burning down the forest. So what did the farmers do or the ranchers do? They decided to put chemicals on the trees, all these that are brown here or white or whatever they are, all these dead trees that then can be removed because they're dead, and they don't show smoke because they're not burning, and it's a way to get around the provisions to try to protect the forest. Very sad. Who here on the conversation tonight would like to live in these huts here on the side of the river in Lagos and all the trees that are floating there? Sawmills. We have a huge problem in Malaysia, cutting down the forests, and also, as I said, Malaysia, it's Indonesia, sorry, cutting down the forests, and in Indonesia, mining nickel and cobalt and so forth for batteries and energy use. Many communities disappearing. Recent forest changes, you can see in the red here where the forest has been being changed, and it's tragic in the Amazon, it's tragic in Russia, all of Northern Europe, basically, and Eastern US. There's been a huge thing of cutting down trees to create pellets to sell from the US Southeast, to sell the pellets for fuel into Europe. There's a movement right now to cut down the forests in California to create pellets because the Southeast has been denuded. It's just something we must fight against. 16 million acres of forest were raised in 2023 alone. 154 million have been degraded with road building, logging. Indonesia and Bolivia are the two biggest, with all these products growing, and cutting down forests is worse. Again, if you remember, go back to the first presentation, we can look at what it means that we cut down forests and what the interconnections are to all of the boundaries. 40% of the world's land has been degraded, and we're adding 100 million hectares a year of degraded land. $44 trillion of soil of the world's economy is being damaged by desertification and not appropriate soil. It's very interesting. The UN held a conference on desertification of lands in December last year, 2 months ago, and the conference failed to reach agreement on how to protect our soils from desertification. This is from a website called the World Drought Atlas, and if you look at all the climate models, you see the Southwest US, just on this picture, getting drier and drier over the next decades as the planet warms. This is part of why we have to get into emergency mode around our water now. We can't afford to be profligate and waste it. We've got to protect it. But the Amazon, major pieces of Africa, the Middle East, much of Europe, Russia, China, huge drought underway. Another risk that people don't tend to talk about much with land is salt. Over the last 50 years, 2.5 billion acres, size of the US, has become saltier. The Salt Lake, as we said, is drying up, causing pollutants to float in the air. The main cause, interestingly, is the road salt used for de-icing. Were you aware for example, that the US uses 25 million tons of salt on our roads each year, where it snows, obviously, and ices the roads. But gosh, 25 million tons being poured into our water system. But also we have issues of agriculture, mining, water treatment, and the like. 3% of the Earth's water is fresh, as we said, 1/10 of 1% is easily accessible to us, and it's getting saltier. This is a NASA picture that describes along the coasts where ocean saltwater is impinging upon coastal non-saltwater coastal areas, and you can see a good piece of California and Mexico. A few years ago, I was in Baja talking with a farmer who lives fairly near to the ocean, couple of hundred yards, I guess. And his farm was having troubles because the ocean water was coming in under the land and adding salt to the soil, and his crops weren't growing. But you can see this is not just a California or Mexico issue. It's on the coasts of much of the planet. So salt from the ocean as well as de-icing our roads is a serious issue. I don't know whether you're aware this, when I found this out doing research for this presentation, it just boggled my mind. There are 30 million abandoned acres of US land right now because there's not enough water or no water. I'll translate that. That's 46,000 square miles of land in the US. You can see where it is, right where the Oglala Aquifer is, and running right up the center of the country, some here in California. We're adding 1.25 million acres per year. It's about 2,000 square miles. This is land that is abandoned that used to be farms, but can't be farmed now because there's no water or it's too dry and so forth. One of the things we hear, if you look at the installing solar farms, there's always the question of where are we going to place the solar arrays? Well, I can point to 46,000 square miles where we could put a whole hell of a lot of solar arrays if we chose to. Of course, we have to get a plumbing line of some sort to move the electrons to where they're needed, but were you aware? I mean, I just ask you to think about this, that we have 46,000 square miles of abandoned farms with a lack of water in our country today. And in Bulgaria, they're closing a farm a week. 900 villages in the mountains in Bulgaria have just been abandoned. I mean, you can look around the world. This is just happening in multiple places. Of course, we have degradation of, from water, floods, wildfires, all that stuff. All of these issues combine. And we also have decided that it's right to pollute our water, I guess. The Environmental Protection Agency says PFAS, one of 15, the family of 15,000 chemicals, is found in sewage and is often spread on our pastures and water. Sewage sludge is the water is evaporated and then sewage sludge is spread on our farms. 3M, the company, told EPA that PFAS contamination was a problem decades ago, and they continue to promote sewage sludge as fertilizer. Our government does. Soil becomes essentially permanently contaminated. Their sewage sludge has been spread over 70 million acres of U.S. farmland right now. There are major issues in, for example, the state of Maine, of all places, with sewage sludge just permanently destroying what had been productive farmland. And you perhaps noticed yesterday the EPA said, well, probably going to diminish the restrictions on PFAS uh, in in the in products and manufactured in our country. This is part of the let's kill the EPA nonsense from the administration in Washington. Another shocking statistic. Private financial institutions have loaned $6+ trillion to companies cutting down forests to grow cows and soybeans and the like, but $2 billion to restore the forests. So it's pretty clear the bankers of the world have decided, raping our environment is a perfectly okay thing to do for short-term gain. And it would be remiss to not talk about the challenges of homeowners insurance here in California. Several companies have exited. Premiums are skyrocketing. The FAIR plan has $250 million in reserves, and I think they just got another $1 billion kicker added to their reserves. The LA fires are going to cost $250 billion to recover from. So it's wonderful that the FAIR plan has $1 billion+ in it now, but doesn't quite touch the $250 billion problem. Many states, Florida, Virginia, Louisiana, and so forth, have had insurance problems. The whole country is in the process of doing that. If lenders say you have to have insurance before they'll lend you money for a home loan, if you can't buy insurance, how will you or can't afford it? That's obviously going to have a huge impact on the housing market. And these charts point to what's happening. The browns are increases in premiums for insurance, and the right side chart talks about or describes where the risks are middle and higher, all the purples and reds and the like. What do we do to protect our land? Well, exponential change is about regenerative organic farming being done globally, plant-based diets, perhaps lab-grown food like Beyond Beef, and reforestation and afforestation wherever possible. We need urban parks. We need mini forests, the Miyawaki forests, and we need canopied nature trails in all of our cities. It's clear we have to replant our land. Next, planetary boundary is nutrient cycles and so-called biogeochemical flows. Easy to say, we are producing and spreading phosphorus and nitrogen fertilizer throughout our environment. The excess phosphorus is leading to water pollution, eutrophication, that is no more oxygen in the water. Oxygen is merging with phosphorus, resulting in algal blooms, dead zones. We have exceeded the boundary for both oxygen and nitrogen. Nitrogen is converted to ammonia and then again interferes with the oxygen flows. It also halves the number of pollinators, and of course we need pollinators like the bees and so forth for much of our food and fruits. I've seen a movie, I think it's called Honeybees or something, where there are people in China on step ladders hand pollinating fruit trees today. I mean, or a few years ago when the movie was made. This is this desperate stuff. This is fish on the Texas coast. Not very pretty. This is water in the Finger Lakes, fresh water in New York State. This is the Florida coast. Anybody want to go for a swim? Ocean dead zones. Basically, it's less than 2 milligrams of oxygen per liter of water. And look at the dead zones along the Gulf of Mexico and the US East Coast and Europe and places around South America and a few in Africa and a great deal over in India and China. Notice the blue color here is open ocean dead zones as compared to coastal, and look at the open ocean on either side of India as it uh, protrudes into the Indian Ocean. And the US, well, actually, probably Mexico and Central America and South America, a little bit in Africa. We're creating these dead zones where, because there's no oxygen, there's no life. We lose plants, we deplete the soil nutrients, we end up with dead fish, contaminated water, threats to the climate. And just as a small anecdote, the price of fertilizer doubled in the past year. And Nigeria, as a country, has nearly 90 million people suffering from insufficient food consumption, and they can't afford to pay the price of more fertilizer. And if they do, they're creating these problems we've just been pointing to. The 2 top meters of soil on around the planet hold trillions of tons of inorganic carbon, 5 times more than the carbon in all the vegetation, and 23 billion tons will be released by mid-century because of our farming practices. So, we're adding about 40 trillion tons of, sorry, billion, excuse me, 40 billion tons of CO2 to the atmosphere every year, and about 60 billion tons of GHGs. And this is more than a third of a year of emissions will be added simply the way we deal with soil. Soil's acidifying, and this speeds the release. Human activities have made the soil inorganic carbon more of a problem. The annual loss of 75 billion tons of soil due to our farming practices, agribusiness, instead of cover crops and regenerative agriculture techniques, we're losing our soil, costing about another $400 billion a year for soil loss. This is a study from the Union of Concerned Scientists. They just a little article they produced. They said that Tyson Foods dumped 370 million pounds in the past year of nitrogen, phosphorus, and oil and cyanide and so forth into the waterways. This is in Texas. And 87 billion gallons of wastewater, which include blood from butchering cows and whatever, and bacteria, feces, animal feces. This is a small piece of what's going on in the US, and this is just one company. Exempt from existing water regulations. There are no limits on phosphorus right now. This is in Texas again in particular. The EPA was expected to have limits published this year. With our new government, I suspect all of this will not happen at all. The EPA's guidelines will cover $1 billion, then eliminate cost of over $1 billion, then eliminate thousands of jobs. And the politicians want the jobs, and big business wants the jobs, and so we pollute our environment. There's possibly a 10th planetary boundary. I haven't mentioned this, but there are some scientists who say the oxygen concentration in water should be thought of as the 10th boundary. There's argument for that. Since 1980, reservoirs have decreased by 18%, lakes 5.5%, California midwaters, that is in the central part of the state, have lost 40% of the oxygen and have dead zones. We're approaching aquatic deoxygenation that will impact all of the planetary boundaries. Change needed here. Regenerative farming, clearly. Shift to composted natural fertilizers. Got to get rid of the nitrogen and phosphorus. A couple of really good films. We showed Common Ground in the Dove Library in Carlsbad a few months ago. Previously we showed The Biggest Little Farm, I think. It's the same place. Great films if you haven't seen them. There's a global movement to separate organic and inorganic processes from waste. We are trying to do that here in California. I think many people still don't quite understand how it works and how to do it, but we're making some progress. We need to stop using chemical fertilizers. One of the most hopeful things that I have read about agriculture comes from this book by John Berger. And he says, if we raise soil's organic matter 1.5% in all row crop fields on the planet, we'd remove all the carbon added to the atmosphere since the Industrial Revolution and bring us back to 290 ppm from our current almost 427, I think it is. One 1 metric ton per hectare application of compost will result in 1 metric ton increase in stable soil carbon year after year for between 20 and 100 years, he says. Someone else has told me it's 20 years, but whatever, it's substantial. So using compost and building soil organic carbon really is a potentially major benefit. There's an organization called Marin Carbon Project in Marin County that's trying to do this stuff for all of the agriculture in Marin County. We could probably use a San Diego Carbon Project also. It's one of the most hopeful things. We can actually use our soil to reduce the emissions in the atmosphere if we use the regenerative agriculture techniques. Very positive. Phosphorus, you can see California, US central part of the country, South America, Europe, again, the Middle East, India, China, far too much phosphorus use. And nitrogen is similar, excuse me, not quite as bad, but much of the US has got too much nitrogen in the soil, and Europe and India and China again. This is global stuff. Our next to last boundary, novel entities. Novel entities, simple. It's something that humans make that doesn't exist in nature, and we're producing them and disrupting the planet. This includes chemicals, microplastics, things that disrupt our endocrine system, organic pollutants, anthropologically mobilized radioactive materials, nuclear waste. The nuclear waste at San Onofre would be in this category. Human interventions in the evolutionary process. That's what we're doing. Contributing to pollution, bioaccumulation, ecosystem disruption, health issues, hormonal imbalances, and on and on. The planetary boundary here is 0 without adequate safety testing. Now, it's quite interesting. We make well over 100,000 chemicals or products that are in the novel entity category. And I think we have in the US tested something like 3% of them for safety. There's, 100,000 plus products that are made and used and shipped and sold that have never been tested for safety. We know this, you can look at beaches all over the world. This is Nairobi, single-use plastic. Since from the period 1950 to 22, we produced 11,000 metric tons of carbon. 170 trillion particles are in the oceans. I don't know how we will ever get them out. There was an article, you probably saw that last week or last couple of weeks, that says that we have found plastic in nearly all human brains that we've looked at. So you and I have plastic in our brain now. One report, one of the paragraphs that I read said that we have a credit card worth of plastic in our brains, many of us. Incredibly disturbing. We have, with this comes environmental racism, to be sure, and waste colonialism. We sell a lot of our, or deliver a lot of our waste to underdeveloped countries and let them deal with it. Like we saw last time when we looked at land use, here is plastic as a novel entity, and this chart's well worth thinking about if you're interested in this issue, or when you're interested. It basically says plastic negatively impacts all of the other 8 boundaries, and there's links here and amazing research behind it. I don't have the time to delve into it now, but if you go back and look at it, it's well worth thinking about. Again, every boundary impacts all the others. PFAS, far worse than DDT. There are 15,000 chemicals in this family. They're used to produce nonstick pans and hiking clothes and fire retardants and dental floss and on and on. 90%, 97% of Americans register PFAS in their body. 60% of our water systems have PFAS. I don't think there's much, if any, in San Diego County. That's a real bonus for us. And states have spread sewage sludge, as I mentioned, with PFAS that causes kidney and prostate cancers, fertility loss, and various other developmental disorders. Maine has a regulation that says you can have no more than 20 parts per trillion of PFAS on farmland, and they actually measured 14,800 parts per trillion. They've banned all PFAS as of 2030, but those lands that have already had sewage sludge spread across them as fertilizer are probably dead indefinitely. Who knows? A number of states, including our friends in Texas, think PFAS is not an issue and refuse to regulate it at all. PFAS in water. The Sweetwater Water District says 60% of U.S. water systems are polluted. Interestingly, you perhaps saw the movie Erin Brockovich in the water pollution in Hinckley that was related to this. 28 years after the legal decision and the movie that we watched, many of us watched, many wells are still polluted. And this is a quote from the people working on it now. This is 2025. Remediation is going to take hundreds of years. It's like a wasteland. The population of Hinckley has gone down I think something like 80% since the pollution was discovered and uncovered. The Cuyahoga River is being restored and has been since 1970. It's still not clean. Flint, Michigan, Lead pipes are not all replaced, and perhaps you saw, like I did, I think it was yesterday or today, that our friends in Washington decided that we would no longer replace lead pipes in our water systems, that we're going to cancel those efforts that Biden had started or furthered. Nuts. Plastics contain at least 16,000 chemicals, 25% thought to be toxic, about 9,000 chemicals, which plastic is, it's only available in plastics. Neonicotinoids devastate the bee and insect populations. That's part of all this chemical stew. There are 400 million metric tons of chemical waste in our country every year. We need a systemic solution. We need a political solution. We need to all be standing up and shouting from the rafters about this stuff and acting. We saw that slide. Herbicides. There are more than 600 million pounds of herbicides that kill unwanted plants that are sprayed across the US. Roundup harms 1,700 species in the US right now. 93% of all endangered species in the country are negatively impacted by Roundup. And of course, that's led to a lot of loss of pollinators and the like. All military bases are polluted, 100% of them, and the water on them. Earth took 4 billion years to produce 1 trillion tons of biomass, and we've produced 1.3 trillion tons in the 20th century of stuff. Humans, we're 1.1% of the Earth's biomass, and yet we outweigh wild animals now 10 to 1. We saw before. Termites, concrete, termites 450 million tons. Concrete, there's 600 million tons of it. Sand, gravel used for construction, 400 billion tons. There are 2 billion cars and 70 billion tons of asphalt to drive on them. It makes tons of sense to, in every community, have a depaving team. We ought to be going around figuring out where we can remove asphalt and restore Earth. Transformative action now. Let's define and enforce the safety metrics that are required for these 100,000 chemicals products we've never tested. Look for risky ones and develop model procedures like those that the CDC uses before approving drugs. We just manufacture chemical stew products and send them out, sell them. We should be testing the risky entities that are already in use. Last topic, last of the boundaries is atmospheric aerosol loading. Basically, this is pollutants, PM 2.5 and so forth in the atmosphere. And if you imagine having a tube and looking down the tube from above the top of the atmosphere down to the bottom of the atmosphere, the more stuff that's blocking your vision to see the Earth, the more polluted things are. The values range from 0 to 1. The boundary is set at 0.1. So we should be able to see 0.9 of the way through. And there is 0.25 in the monsoon regions, reduces rainfall and harms the biosphere, and we're far beyond this boundary. No, we're not. This is one we have not passed, excuse me. And it's relevant to EJ considerations and human health. The pollutants are globally decreasing a little bit, and this is an interesting phenomenon. In 2020, we stopped allowing ships at sea to use high sulfur fuel. The sulfur was adding atmospheric loading chemicals to the atmosphere, but it was also reflecting heat. And there have been a number of reports recently that say that the planet is warming unexpectedly much. And James Hansen and others think that the reason is that we are no longer allowing the sulfur fuel in and so in some sense it's cleaning up the atmosphere, but at a cost of allowing more heat to land on the planet and warming it faster. So this is Pakistan. I don't know if I'd be wanting to walk around. Any of you gone to the Taj Mahal? Here in the middle of the chart, this is the middle of the slide this is the Taj Mahal in last fall. This is called horrible air pollution, to say the least. Desert dust, soot from wildfires. We've had a doubling of aerosol in the atmosphere. And by the way, it causes these pollutants in the atmosphere somewhere between 7 and I saw an article actually yesterday that says that 10.2 million premature deaths happened from aerosol loading in the atmosphere last year, in the past year. So whatever the number is, there's a lot of premature deaths. Aerosol loading increasing in the Arctic and around India and the Middle East and the Arctic, but getting a little better in the blue spaces here and in much of Europe, North Africa, and so forth, China. So we have now surveyed all of the 9 planetary boundaries, and if you're depressed, I don't blame you. It's a terribly challenging condition that we find ourselves in. And yet we are one more topic important to highlight, and that is the tipping points that we are approaching. The science world has identified several dozen possible tipping points, and there are 5 that are close. Now, what's meant by a tipping point is that once we go there, once we pass the tipping point, there's no return. It's the point of no return. The most likely, the scientists of the world are saying the most likely first tipping point that we'll cross is the turning over of the atmosphere of the Atlantic meridional overturning circulation, that we will warm water comes from the Southern Ocean through the equator north to the Atlantic, and that warmth warms much of Northern Europe and Eastern Canada and some in the US. And it's very likely that when that circulation stops, that we will have crossed the point of no return. Among other things, not only will it be hard to start the circulation again, but it will clearly lead to more and more rapid ice melt. So there are lots of possible tipping points. We have lots of monitoring going on from various satellite systems and science projects and so forth. The key ones are the Atlantic overturning circulation, the Greenland ice sheet melting, the Arctic ice sheets melting that we've mentioned before, boreal permafrost. We're now coming to, probably in the next few years, decade or 2 at most, a time when there will be no ice in the Arctic in the summer. Those are the key ones. And of course, the Amazon rainforest could become a source rather than a sink of carbon and related emissions. It's within a few percent of being there now. So these tipping points, of course, all interrelate to each other, which is what this chart is saying. Some impacts of tipping points with AMOC off, all of the places here in blue, Eastern US, Europe, whatever, China will have a huge reduction in wheat growth, maize growth, and rice. So we will have to figure out where else we can grow this, grow food as people move inland. We are in a condition of overshoot. We're using, I think I said in the first presentation, if everyone lived on the planet the way we in the US live, we would need 5 planet Earths. That's an example of overshoot. Extreme weather and wildfires are part of the overshoot. Decreased food production, increased water scarcity, and having too much of it and too little of it, depending on where you are and what year it is. Increase in waste and plastic pollutions and other pollutants we were just talking about. We have declining global sinks. We have now some forests that are emitting more carbon than they're absorbing. Resilience loss, well, we can see that over 20 years, we've had the last 20 years, 7,000 major disasters killing millions of people with huge dollar losses, and we're headed for more. We need effective global governance. We need global leaders to agree to get us back on track. And, you know, as we said last time, and I'll say again, we've had all kinds of UN meetings, and in the ones in 2024, they all failed. None of them reached their goals for agreement. We have a huge risk of the UN Seabed Mining Authority approving seabed mining, which would destroy more ecosystems on the planet. The plastics treaty has not been signed, and so forth. So we definitely need global governance, and the UN, bless them, is really trying hard, but they're not pulling it off, and we're not getting national agreements and so forth. Core solutions, 10 core things we must do: retire coal plants, invest in clean energy, retrofit and decarbonize our buildings. We're not doing nearly enough of that. Decarbonize cement and steel. We have carbon-free steel and cement now, but we're not using it much yet. Shift to EVs, increase public transit in spades. This is transportation is the largest source of emissions for us in California. Decarbonize aviation and shipping. Halt deforestation and restore our degraded lands. Crucial. Reduce food loss and improve our agricultural practices. Eat more plants and less meat. This is a big picture view of what we need to do to deal with our planetary boundary crisis. We need to lay out pathways for the Sustainable Development Goals. I'm working, and invite you, any of you who want to join us with the United Nations Association, working on helping the UN move to implement the SDGs. The SDGs were set in 2015 and the hope was to have them completed by 2030. And in 2024, they were 17% completed, but we were 9 of 15 years into the cycle that had been set as targets. So we have a lot of work to do there. We've got to get emissions down. We've got to stop biodiversity loss. We have to change our patterns of extracting resources from the planet and do circular implementation of circular model implementation of everything as far as possible. And we have to change our economics. We allow oil companies to gas companies and so forth to take their products and effectively use our atmosphere as a waste dump. And we don't charge them to clean it up. There are projects that say that define a concept called the social cost of carbon that says this is how much it would cost to clean up a ton of emissions that are in the atmosphere that no one's paying for at the moment, and is harming the planet in all the ways we've been talking about. The federal government has had prices in the social cost of carbon ranging between $20 and $200 a ton. One research project published last year said the real cost is $1,000 a ton. There's actually one report that said it was $6,000 a ton, but let's use the $1,000 ton cost. We are emitting 60 billion tons. So if we have a social cost of carbon, $1,000 times that is $60 trillion. So let me say it differently. The emissions that we're putting into our atmosphere and not charging the polluters for will cost us $60 trillion for this year's cleanup, and $60 trillion for last year's cleanup, and so forth. How will your children, our grandchildren, our successors fund this huge economic burden that we're leaving to them? To remain within the boundaries, we need a transformation. We've talked about the transformations of diets, of industry, of the way we live, the way we move, the way we manufacture things, the way we produce pollutants and stop polluting them. Having now looked at the planetary boundaries in a framework, or looked at them and seen what they're all about, a number of agencies and groups around the world have been asking, in the health sciences, for example, what does this mean for health? And I'll show you in a moment. The folks at Lancet in the UK, the medical group, has identified what they call oh gosh, I just blanked out on the phrase, planetary systems or some such thing, and they defined 8 of them, and they say we have to change and adapt to all 8 of these to protect human health. This framework has been used in education and philosophy. Religious folks, the Pope and others, have been using the planetary boundaries framework. It's in psychology. We need laws around this. We need governance, we need to change our behavior. We need to change economics. I'm going to end here in a few minutes with a discussion of economics, even creative arts. The health threat, more than 500 billion hours of work were lost last year due to heat exposure. So probably the single biggest exposure to us as people is excessive heat. And so we're losing great amounts of work and potential energy. This Lancet calls the boundaries the Earth system boundaries rather than planetary boundaries. And like we talked about last time, the planetary boundaries can be matched with equality measures, as Kate Rayworth does, excuse me, in her work on donut economics. The Lancet uses a similar model, and they say they have a corridor, and they say one side of the corridor are the Earth system boundaries, and the other side are human health, and we have to live within the safe space, if you will, for the biosphere and nutrients and water and aerosols, the stuff we've been talking about. And they also say 7 of the 8 Earth system boundaries have been transgressed. The planetary boundary scientists say 7 of the 9 have been transgressed. The Lancet says we need to define for the whole planet minimum requirements for food, water, energy, and infrastructure, and make that available to every human, to everyone on the planet, and leave enough for non-human life also. And living within within this corridor that they've defined, they define as Earth system justice. We clearly need that. Level 1, in their view, is basic human dignity. Level 2 is required to escape poverty. So we need survival, basic human dignity, and we need tools to and processes to help people, everyone, escape poverty. The Lancet says the safe and just climate Earth system boundary will be overshot by 2050, even if everyone on the planet lives with only the minimum required access to resources. This is a safe and just place, but requires radical sociological and technological changes. Makes sense to me. I think of people like Elon Musk, and imagine him acting in a way congruent with helping everyone on the planet have access to safe and just resources. It's hard to imagine how it would happen. I was doing this part of the presentation with some friends from the Sierra Club, and one of them recently moved to San Diego from Switzerland, and he said that his boss in working for the UN in Switzerland loved this particular chart. Basically, it's it's a way of mapping the 17 SDGs to the planetary boundaries. And, we have to have a basic biosphere. We have to, have water, air, and biodiversity and so forth. On top of the basic biosphere, we need to meet the world's needs, the societal needs on the planet, the equity for everyone. And then on top of that, we have to worry about economies and business and so forth. I mean, business should not be, in this thinking at least, business should not be to maximize shareholder profits, but rather should be to live within the planetary boundaries, and within that context, then maximize profits. And it's a whole different way of thinking that we probably need to pull this off. And to finish this, I just finished today. I appreciate your perseverance. I know we've covered a lot of material. I would like to reference a document called Planetary Solvency. This is written by the Institute and Faculty of Actuaries, was published last month, about 3 weeks ago or so. And the actuaries who define risks for insurance companies and so forth, not very liberal people, to say the least, say that we are nowhere near identifying what the real risks that we're facing are, and that net zero, they say, means that there's a 50% chance that we will get to a stable place on the planet. And that, even our definition, the IPCC definition of net zero, is not really zero, so to speak. And so they built this chart. It's near the end of their report, and they talk about risks from limited to extreme, and they talk about the scale from extremely unlikely to likely to highly likely. And the gray ones are where we are today, and the darker ones above are where we will be, they say, in 2050. And to highlight this, somewhere between catastrophic and extreme, these are defined in their report if you want to go read it, uh, is the risk level, and it's likely or highly likely to happen by 2050 for 1 and 2, climate and nature, and 3 and 4 are society and economy. So they see a huge thrust toward massive risk developing beyond, out of the discussion we've been having last time and this time. And this is their summary chart. And I won't belabor the whole thing, but what does extreme mean? This is the financial impact. This is the insurance industry actuaries and the faculty that teaches actuaries and the like. They say extreme means that GDP loss is 50% or higher globally, human mortality 50% or higher, that by 2050 we will have 4 billion deaths from what we've been talking about. And we have a decent chance, or some chance, of 3% centigrade temperature rise and so forth. And catastrophic is a little better. We only will lose 25% of GDP globally. We're talking about hundreds of trillions of dollars now, $100 trillion, that category. We'll have 2 billion deaths with 25% probability, and we will hit 2 degrees centigrade increase by 2050. So you can read this when you review the slides and the notes later. Like last time, we'll make the slides available if you're interested in them to anybody who wants them. And folks, we are headed over a cliff, and we have to look at all 9 planetary boundaries. We can't keep talking about climate only, because the problem we're facing is far bigger than climate. We need a huge amount of energy to further understand where we are, and will to fight for the change that we need to mitigate the risks and the painful impacts that we're headed toward. And the good news is we need to, if you will, have a great turnaround, right? We can't continue business as usual. That's surely not going to do it. We have to have a great turnaround. We need to set some 2050 goals that are really serious for all of the boundaries and work toward them and move toward a safe and just space for all life on the planet. We've been on this trajectory of making things bad. We need the turnaround. And next time, we will look at how we map the planetary boundaries to local action and what turnaround things we can do locally. I don't see how personally in the next couple of years we're going to move Washington in a very desirable direction for us and for the planet, but we sure can work and act locally. We must do so. So please come back and let's talk together about how we can, what we can do locally. And by all means, please jump in with all the energy you can muster to educate people about where we are and to cause the positive change that we need in all of these dimensions.
Well, Joe, you paused for a moment for breath there, so I'm going to jump in. I want to thank you so much for all this information, although it wasn't exactly the most cheerful topic, but you did enlighten us, and that's important. And I always like to think that the best antidote to climate anxiety or anxiety about the environment in general is action. And we will be covering a lot of actions that we could take in the next month's program. So I do hope you all will join us for that. We kind of went over time here. It's almost pushing 7:30. So I'm going to kind of just look. There's a couple of questions in here that are somewhat related. Alice asked about Musk's and Doge's cronies attacking and shutting down NOAA, including the satellites and other weather and climate data gathering. And she wants to know if that's already endangered the data gathering moving forward, or do we have other options available to us?
It is in danger. There have been some private organizations asking or suggesting they might replace some of what NOAA is doing, but there's no way any organization could capture what NOAA is doing.
Okay. And then Suzanne, on a similar note, was talking about due to the cuts in US aid, et cetera, what are the most effective ways we could combat the Doge cuts and help those in need globally? And I think we'll probably be covering a lot of that in the next talk, right?
Well, the next talk we're going to talk about local action, not global action, but by all means, every organization, there are lots of global aid organizations, right? For refugees and for food and health. But, none of us have the resources and the access to the medicines and the food that are necessary. I mean, there are literally now children dying because they don't have the peanut butter paste that they need to survive because we've cut the funding on USAID. I mean, we can have, how would I say, organizations that make up part of the gap, but there's no way that I can see that we can recover what USAID has done and what has been doing. And I think we're just perpetrating huge pain and death on lots of people who are at the bottom of the food chain and the wealth chain.
Okay. I just want to point out that this recording will be posted to the NCCCA YouTube channel coming up in a few days, and that the next talk is on Thursday, March 13th. So please mark your calendars. And for those of you who are local, we have another event that we're working on that's going to be called Launching Earth Month. And that's going to be on March 29th, Saturday. This will be an in-person event at the McGee Park. So I will be forwarding you more information about that. But if you're a local group and you want to come and talk about what you're doing for Earth Day, please get in touch with us and we'll let you know the details and how you could participate. So Carter, do you have any other follow-up questions or anything like that?
No, I do not have any follow-up questions.
Okay.
Everything went
Okay,
good
well,
tonight.
I think that since it's pretty late now, I think I will go ahead and let everybody have a nice evening. And thank you again, Joe, and we'll see you guys all soon. So thank you so much.
Thank
Bye-bye.
you. Thanks, Joe, very much.
You're welcome. Thanks for
Yeah.
coming.